Have you ever felt confused or hurt by love, but couldn't quite put your finger on why? We often blame ourselves, maybe our partners, but what if the problem isn't just, a personal failing? What if it's something much bigger?
Today, we're taking a deep dive into precisely that question.
Yeah.
We're exploring a really fascinating sociological look at why love hurts in modern times. We're kind of shifting our focus beyond individual psychology to consider the powerful social and cultural forces at play.
Right. And our source for this deep dive is, well, it's truly illuminating. It's excerpts from a book called Why Love Hurts, a Sociological Explanation.
Mm.
This material really invites us to rethink our most intimate experiences, revealing how they're shaped by these grander societal structures. Okay, let's start uncovering these insights.
Yeah, our mission today is really to help you see that the misery of love isn't just about weak psyches or, dysfunctional childhoods. It's profoundly shaped by social and cultural tensions. You'll gain a new lens, hopefully, through which to view your own romantic experiences, making the invisible influences visible.
Okay, so let's begin with a surprising historical twist. For centuries, right, in Western Europe, love was really woven into the fabric of society. It was often governed by ideals like chivalry and romanticism. Think about it. The male ideal of chivalry, defending the weak, courage, loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And for women whose social standing was often inferior, this male devotion, even like glorifying female frailty into softness, offered a kind of compensation.
Right.
Love promised them a moral status and dignity they were often denied elsewhere. It skillfully concealed these deep gender inequalities.
That's quite striking, isn't it? How seductive love became precisely because it concealed those underlying inequalities. And this naturally leads us to ask, if love was so deeply tied to social roles back then, how did it evolve? How did it become this intensely personal thing we feel it is today?
Yeah. Well, to understand that shift, let's look at how societal structures historically influenced mate selection. Just imagine Jane Austen's world for a second. Courtship wasn't private. It was often this very public affair involving extended kin relationships, to gain intimate knowledge of a prospective spouse.
Right, like Lady Russell influencing Anne Elliot in Persuasion. It was a process of checking claims, verifying credentials.
Exactly. And economic considerations were huge, paramount, really. A woman's dowry, for instance, was often called the most significant factor in her marriageability.
It bestowed status, forged alliances.
Yeah. And Emma's big mistake in Emma wasn't really about judging looks or character. It was about failing to assess that objective compatibility.
And commitment.
Commitment was fundamentally underpinned by promise-keeping. Breaches of promise weren't just awkward. They were prosecuted, seriously viewed. They affected your reputation.
They could even lead to really dramatic consequences, like in Dr. Thorne. So, if we put this in a broader context, the book argues that in pre-modern times, things like character and commitment weren't just inner psychological traits, they were the result of specific social mechanisms. Dense social networks, objective criteria for a mate, socio-religious economic status being a totally legitimate reason for choice.
Ritualized emotions, too.
Exactly, ritualized emotions, and the vital role of keeping promises for your reputation. The self was, in a way, less vulnerable to others' gaze and to their validation. Your feelings didn't just, radiate from some deeply hidden interiority, like we think of it now.
But here's where the story takes a really sharp turn. Modernity. Things change dramatically. We move towards what the book calls a regime of emotional authenticity. Which means our feelings became central. We're now expected to fully understand them, act on them, reveal them openly.
Make decisions based on them.
Right. Let them guide our most important life decisions, especially in love. Questions like, do I really love him? Or is this love healthy? Those are distinctly modern questions.
And crucially, commitment now follows the emotions.
Not the other way around.
No. Certainty about your feelings comes either from, intense self-scrutiny or maybe some overwhelming revelation, love at first sight, that kind of thing. This whole shift has profound implications for our emotional inner lives.
And this transformation, it didn't just happen in a vacuum, obviously. It was propelled by what's described as a great transformation of love, driven by new cultural forces. Starting around the mid-19th century, you get photography, movies.
Yeah.
They start standardizing these canons of erotic allure.
Making sexual attractiveness its own thing.
Exactly, a distinct cultural category, separate from moral value.
Right.
And the commodification of sex and sexuality made sexual desirability central to choosing a mate, not just tied to reproduction or marriage anymore.
Then you have second wave feminism in the 60s, reconceptualizing sexuality as political, linking pleasure to autonomy, equality. And the gay movement further associated sex with democratic values like choice and self-determination. All this granted sexual desirability, this sort of autonomous power it didn't have before.
And what's particularly interesting here is how sexiness became a diffuse status characteristic. Meaning a highly valued trait that isn't necessarily tied to your social class or wealth. And this fundamentally started disrupting traditional patterns of homogamy.
Just marrying someone from a similar social background.
Right. So, for instance, someone like Angelina Jolie is mentioned as embodying these classless codes of sexiness.
Suggesting sexiness can be an alternative route for, say, less wealthy women to access powerful men.
Exactly. So the marriage market starts to, as the book says, interfere with, overlap, and is sometimes even replaced by a sexual social arena.
So what does this mean for you, the modern lover, navigating all this?
Well, it means a multiplication of criteria for choice, which leads to many more contradictions. So if marrying someone from a similar background is one pull, then sexiness introduces this conflicting dimension.
Our romantic habitus, our sort of ingrained way of doing relationships, becomes inherently complicated.
Because we internalize these different sets of evaluations. Some pull us towards reproducing social class, others towards these media-produced classless images.
Which naturally makes you wonder, in a world of individualized choice, abundant options, what happens to commitment? And the data, well, it reveals a pretty profound transformation. Since the 80s in the U.S., you see the average age of marriage going up, more unmarried people.
A huge rise in single-person households.
Yeah, partly due to later marriages, but also increased divorce rates.
Yeah.
Marriage duration has decreased.
And you get new categories like living apart together, LAT.
Right, reflecting maybe an unwillingness to commit to sharing a home. Even things like hooking up or polyamory challenge traditional ideas of exclusivity.
And this is where the personal stories really kind of drive the point home. We heard from Simon, who said if a woman writes she wants a serious relationship, it's a put-off.
A put-off? Why?
Because, he says, you will be able to manipulate them easily. He finds it less interesting because it signals dependence to him.
Wow. Now compare that to the 18th or 19th century, where a woman's sexual seriousness was exactly how she established her reputation, signaled she was marriageable.
It's a complete reversal.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then there's Daniel, another interviewee. He's overwhelmingly committed to the experience and sentiment of love, capital L love, but not to one specific person.
Right. He described feeling a kind of violation when a woman used a pet name. He felt invaded.
And he left her the next day.
The next day. And the book stresses this isn't necessarily a fear of intimacy in the usual psychological sense. It's more like a strategic need for distance.
So both Simon and Daniel seem to express this desire for distance, or maybe a dislike for having too much power over a woman, which actually prevents his falling in love.
Yeah, it suggests women's greater emotional availability and desire for commitment creates this kind of emotional relationship of supply and demand.
Where abundance of available women can actually decrease their perceived value, making it difficult to ascribe value.
Whereas scarcity makes it easier to assign value quickly.
So this leads to what the book terms abulic commitment phobia.
Abulic.
Yeah, essentially where the capacity to want and desire sort of unravels. You see people expressing doubts like, it's only natural to wonder if someone you might meet down the road will be better than your current partner. That kind of constant questioning.
Okay, let's unpack this with another example. Eugene, a 54-year-old divorced man. He loves Susanna very much, apparently. But he couldn't decide if he wanted children or a new family with her. He deliberated endlessly, scrutinized himself, but just could not see one way or another what I wanted to do.
So what happened?
He broke up with her. And he says, until today, I don't know what I really wanted.
Wow. That state is called cool ambivalence, where you have these conflicting emotions coexisting, but the feelings themselves are kind of dampened, almost blunted.
And it's not presented as a psychological flaw, right?
Yeah. No, the argument is it's a property of the institutions that organize our lives, like wanting both love and autonomy, or needing care, but also valuing self-reliance, often pulling these desires from different spheres, like family versus the market. This conflict blunts emotions and blocks action, leading to abulia, that inability to act or make a firm decision.
So how does all this affect our sense of self, our identity? Modernity seems to have fundamentally shifted the big question we ask about our existence.
Well, so.
Well, philosopher Jean-Luc Marion suggests that instead of Descartes' classic, I think, therefore I am, asking, do I exist? The more pressing question for the modern self is, does anybody love me?
Our fundamental sense of security, our sense of worth.
Our ontological security, yeah, and self-worth are now deeply tied to our romantic and erotic bonds.
And it's compelling how romantic love is described as having this power to enhance the ego, to provide an accrued perception of its power just through another person's gaze.
Like that quote from Werther.
Right. She loves me. And how precious I have become to myself, how I worship at my own altar since I know that she loves me. When you're loved, the love object enjoys this freedom from criticism, their characteristics are valued more highly, and that forgiveness in turn makes the loved person value themselves more.
Which is a stark contrast to the past. Historically, gaining recognition was much more about demonstrating conformity to your class and gender roles.
Advice books codified proper behavior to ensure successful courtship and confirm your social standing. It was about fitting in.
This raises an important question. How different are today's self-help books then?
Well, they've shifted the focus entirely onto the self, almost disconnected from social rank or recognition. You see titles like Who Am I? Or whole sections on being self-confident. The implication is that worth is viewed basically as a problem of the self with itself.
Not a problem of recognition from others.
Exactly. And recognition, by its very definition, cannot be self-generated. You need someone else to recognize you.
This brings us to a really crucial point about the pain of modern love. Catherine, an interviewee, couldn't get over her last relationship. Why?
She said, I wanted to be good enough to be the one for him. I think I wanted to prove, on some unconscious level, that I was good enough to get someone to marry me.
Her suffering was clearly deeply tied to her sense of self-worth.
Yeah, and this helps explain why the advice industry around dating, sex, and love is so huge and profitable. The book says the stakes of love, dating, and sex have become very high in terms of their capacity to establish social and self-worth.
It's fascinating to contrast this with historical suffering, though.
Absolutely. For romantics like Byron, pain was seen as a manifestation of a greater existence. Remember, to love desperately is still happiness.
Right. Lack of reciprocity didn't destroy the self. Suffering actually bestowed heroism. It showed the depth of his soul.
It accrued symbolist emotional capital and even enhanced the image of masculinity.
Compare that to medieval lovesickness.
Totally different. Seen as a bodily imbalance, a disorganization. It didn't point to the self's intrinsic worth. Victims of love were considered madmen, fools.
Their suffering was almost on the same level as an organic disease.
Exactly.
So the core takeaway here is that modern love suffering is just profoundly tied to our self-worth. Take Irene. She moved to London for her boyfriend. He cools down.
And she immediately thinks,
It's always my fault. That I must have done something to make him run away from me. She even blamed her fucked up childhood.
And connecting this back to the bigger picture, the book argues this confusion often has a sociological basis. Our self-image does not precede the romantic interaction, but rather has become something to be crucially negotiated and established in it.
Which means we're caught in this constant push-pull, right, between preserving our self-image and defending our self-interest.
It creates a maddening dynamic. Anne described it perfectly. These power games.
Like, do I call him? Don't I call him?
Yeah, if she shows too much interest, maybe the man runs away. If she's too reserved, he thinks she's cold.
She feels her natural tendency to be nice and show the guy I want him actually drives them away.
Which leads her to ask questions, I make demands, I start nagging, and then the man pulls away even more. It's a cycle.
This really makes you wonder about moral clarity in relationships today compared to the past.
Definitely. In Auster's world, remember Willoughby? His dishonorable act of misleading Marianne, even though he loved her, was clearly condemned by their social circle.
Her suffering had moral clarity.
Yes, because her deficiencies were seen as external related to behavior, not her essential self. Her pain wasn't private. It was shared, understood within a clear moral and social fabric.
Today, that moral significance can feel incredibly uncertain, murky even. The source gives an example. A woman whose boyfriend cheated. She starts medicalizing his behavior, trying to understand it psychologically.
Which sort of obscures the proper reaction, maybe just moral outrage or leaving.
Right. And she ends up asking an anonymous internet community for moral guidance because she genuinely doesn't know how to weigh the moral significance of her story.
And this self-doubt, this attendant need to be advised, the book suggests it stems from a position where the self struggles to assign moral weight to someone else's behavior. and even feels implicated in another's failings. The onus of moral responsibility, weirdly, veers toward the person who is abused.
So, okay, how does this translate into how we actually approach love today? How we search for a mate?
Well, the argument is our search has become incredibly hyper-cognized, very rational.
Compared to the simpleton pre-modern actors, as the book puts it.
Right. Contemporary individuals developed this elaborate set of criteria, not just the old social or educational ones, but physical, sexual, and most of all, emotional.
Psychology, the internet, market logic.
All contribute to this cultural personality that has considerably refined and multiplied its tastes and capacity for discernment and choice.
You see this particularly clearly in online dating, don't you? Applying a rational method of gathering information to select a mate, like shopping.
It's compelling, though, how the book argues it's not necessarily equality itself that has lowered the temperature of romantic relationships.
Not equality. What then?
Rather, it's the rationalization of love, the way that scientific reflexivity, contractualism, and consumer rationality have permeated romantic life. And these forces, the argument goes, conflict with the regimes of meaning through which, historically, men and women have experienced and expressed sexual desire.
Let's dig into that a bit. Why did those traditional gender-coded practices like opening the door for a lady or kneeling to declare one's love, why did they often feel more erotic?
Well, the book suggests a few reasons. They aestheticized male power. They sort of subsumed domination under sentiment and deference.
Making power veiled, implicit.
Exactly. They enabled ritualization, allowed for playful ambiguity like mock deference. Feminist practices, by contrast, often aim to make power explicit, which can paradoxically de-eroticize these interactions.
So this makes you wonder, what happens when that desired gender equality really happens in the dating world?
According to one gay interviewee quoted, "It's hell."
Hell. Why?
He says he doesn't know if picking up the check makes him seem dominant or if sitting meekly makes him seem like he needs to be taken care of.
It's uncertainty, not ambiguity.
Precisely. And uncertainty is painful because it focuses people intensely on the rules of interaction, which inhibits sexual desire and creates anxiety.
Another man put it very bluntly. All my male friends are very confused with women these days. We simply have no clue what is expected of us.
He continues, "I think I can say all the men I know are very intimidated by women by the fact they don't know what the rules are."
So bringing this all together, what's the outcome?
This sociological tension, the book argues, ultimately leads to irony as a dominant trope with which to discuss love.
Irony.
Yeah. Modern romantic conditions often resemble sobering up more than passionate fervor. Love becomes the object of ironic gloss.
This ironic structure of romantic feeling makes it harder to fully buy into passionate, self-sacrificing commitment.
And beyond these big structural shifts, there's another layer. The influence of mass-manufactured fantasies on our romantic lives.
Right. Love increasingly contains these imaginary objects of longing that are circulated by, cultural genres, technologies.
Think of Emma Bovary. She repeated to herself, "I have a lover." She was entering a marvelous realm in which everything would be passion, ecstasy, and rapture.
She felt she was making the long dream of her youth come true, living out a fantasy.
And what's really compelling here is how these fantasies impact the actual structure of desire. We increasingly apprehend desires and emotions through things like commodities, media images, stories, and technologies.
So our imagination is shaped by culture.
Yeah, it's described as highly institutionalized and highly individualized. It often lacks specific real objects or maybe has difficulties fixating on a single object.
Okay, let's look at Catherine Townsend's experience mentioned in the source. It illustrates this perfectly. She invited her ex-boyfriend to Las Vegas, hoping this zany, crazy environment would bring them closer.
Like in a rom-com.
Exactly, like in a romantic comedy. But the reality,
Reality.
much more mundane.
They had the same discussions, and even after drinking the contents of the minibar, our relationship problems did not disappear.
So the narrative structure of anticipation, shaped by the romantic comedy, just completely failed to match the actual reality.
And this disconnect between fantasy and reality, it's often exacerbated by the simple irritations of shared daily domestic life. These little annoyances about a person's character or habits, they seem peculiarly modern, reflecting a new way relationships are organized.
In contrast, the book notes, long-distance relationships are more stable, Why?
Because it's easier to idealize one's partner when she is at a distance. Closeness or intense forms of familiarity makes us focus on discrete moments, tiny details.
Making us less able to attend to and focus on their cognitive form, leading to those irritations and disappointments.
This brings us back around to the idea of inflated expectations about partners.
Right. Lori Gottlieb, the Atlantic writer, famously pleaded for women to lower their expectations, to look for the good qualities of men who may not fit with their exigent dream lists.
But the source argues the problem isn't just about expectations being too high, it's deeper. It's about a psychological ontology of the self.
Meaning?
Meaning we approach others as having stable, nameable, knowable psychological properties. We're searching for people with these definite, knowable, stable qualities.
Like Barbara, the divorcee mentioned. She needed a man to fit her complex psyche. Very independent, but also needs to be cuddled to feel supported.
Or a guy very strong, very sure of himself, but also very soft with me.
And her friends evaluated her boyfriend by asking, don't you want someone to whom that comes instinctively? They were demanding this really elaborate psychological script.
And it's intriguing how technology-enabled intimacy weaves into this whole picture. A New York Times contest apparently found this shift from how do we get the physical without the emotional, hookups.
How do we get the emotional without the physical?
Exactly, through online chats, webcams. Or its story is mentioned. She corresponded with someone for a long time, felt she knew him deeply, but they never actually met.
He canceled their meeting last minute.
Yeah, but her feelings didn't change. She said, I kept loving him all the same. I feel very close to him, even if we do not correspond anymore.
Wow. It highlights desire becoming autotelic.
Meaning it feeds itself with maybe little capacity to actually shift from the fantasy realm into the messiness of daily life and real interaction.
So wrapping this up, what's the core takeaway from this deep dive into why love hurts? We've really unpacked how modern love's pain isn't just about our individual psychology, is it?
Not at all. It's profoundly shaped by the transformation of societal structures, the rise of emotional authenticity, the complexities of the modern love market,
The redefinition of recognition, the rationalization of romance.
and the constant challenge of fantasy bumping up against reality.
And to put this in a broader context, the book suggests something quite paradoxical.
It says modern selves are actually better equipped than ever to cope with breakups and abandonment through things like detachment, autonomy, hedonism, irony. But paradoxically, these very strategies might deprive us of the capacity to fully experience passion, to withstand the doubts and uncertainties that come with loving and attachment.
So love hasn't stopped hurting.
No. It has simply changed the ways in which it hurts.
Which leads us to a final question for you, listening. If our coping mechanisms for modern love might also be preventing us from fully experiencing it, what does that mean for the pursuit of connection in your own life? What stands out to you from this deep dive? What might shift your perspective on love's enduring and sometimes painful mystery?